And what's relevant to the group in here is it really describes the role of a union steward at the workplace, at the most elemental level between the supervisor and the steward on the workroom floor. There are three major characters in the book who are union stewards. There's Paul, who is a dedicated and caring steward with an aggressive, confrontational style of dealing with management, with a temper that sometimes limits his effectiveness as a steward, but he fights really hard for the employees that he represents, and his heart's in the right place. Then there's Angela, who is also dedicated and caring. She does not openly disrespect management the way Paul does. She doesn't lose her temper. She's intelligent. She's a tough bargainer. She's just a very good steward. And then there is Ron, who's been a steward longer than the other two, become a little bit jaded, a little bit cynical. He's a little friendlier to management than the other two are. He tells some really awful jokes. And I would give you some examples, but I don't want everybody in the room groaning at these jokes, so I'll let you wait till you read the book. But if an employee goes to Ron with an issue that needs to be grieved, he'll handle it effectively and efficiently. And you learn a lot from these chapters about the role of the steward. The first lesson, which maybe many of you understand already, the role of a steward is not simply to defend the bad workers, which is a common misperception. It's really to try to prevent management from abusing their power, and that is a never-ending struggle. You also learn it seldom goes the way it's supposed to go by the textbook. A steward, in theory, a steward reads the contract, sees some clear language over here, sees a violation over there, meets with the supervisor, gets a settlement written up correcting the violation. Boy, I wish it were that simple in all my years of being a steward. Once in a while it happens like that, but most of the time it doesn't. And a steward has to use their own judgment a lot of times. You go to a grievance meeting, management makes a settlement offer. It gives you part of what you were asking for, but not the whole thing. Do you accept that settlement, or do you reject it, which means giving up what they were offering to you in the hope of getting the whole thing higher up? There's no guidebook, no rule book that tells you automatically how to make that decision. So there's a number of judgment calls that come up in the book that of that type of situation. You also have to, a lot of being a steward is understanding the people that you're dealing with on several levels. Your coworkers with all of their different weaknesses and abilities and different backgrounds, different attitudes, and trying to build unity among a diverse workforce is sometimes a daunting task. You also have to understand the supervisors and the managers. Even in a place with a hostile atmosphere, it's not uniformly hostile, and you have to learn each individual supervisor and manager in the best way to approach them. And that's more of an art than a science, and you'll see that in the book. There's even a question of the relation of the stewards to the higher-up union officials. Because over these 15 years that the book covers in this fictional local, there are 3 different local union presidents, and 2 of them are quite good. One of them's quite the opposite, and that creates some tactical issues for the stewards trying to solve some problems. So I think what I'm going to do, briefly, read a little bit from one of the chapters, some excerpts from one of the early chapters. The chapter is called Blaming the Victim, and where I'm picking up the story, Angela, one of the stewards I mentioned, is sitting in the union office at the plant on the midnight shift, and she gets a phone call from Martha Huntington, and Martha's reading from a letter that she received that day. You are hereby notified that you are being placed in an off-duty status without pay, effective immediately, and will continue in this status until you are advised otherwise. The reasons for this action are: information received from the Postal Inspection Service indicates that coworker Philip Knapp was arrested and charged with felonious assault after you filed a complaint that he assaulted you and threatened you with a weapon. Retaining you on duty may be injurious to yourself and to others. Based upon the above, your retention in a duty status would not be in the best interest of the Postal Service. Angela couldn't believe her ears. The victim of a vicious attack was being told not to come to work because management was afraid of a bloody scene at the post office. As if it were Martha's fault that her boyfriend attacked her. Who signed the letter? Angela asked. James Newton. That son of a bitch, Angela said in a voice that was barely audible. I need to come back to work, Martha pleaded. I need the money, but mostly I need to get out of this house. Right now, Philip's in jail, so why do they think he'll attack me at work? They have no reason, Martha. Even if he wasn't in jail, they should help and protect you, not punish you. Angela, what if Philip attacks me again? If I file another complaint with the police, will the post office fire me? The question was absurd. Yet, given management's response to Philip's arrest, it was not so ridiculous. Angela's heart went out to this young woman who had been abused by her boyfriend and betrayed by her employer. They talked for another half hour. Angela was not trained as a counselor, but she had good instincts. She knew the most important things were to comfort Martha, to build up her shattered self-esteem, to alleviate any misplaced guilt and shame, and to let her know she would do everything in her power to get James Newton's letter rescinded. So Angela leaves the union office and starts walking across the plant towards the management office, and she's interrupted by an employee with a frivolous complaint that I'm going to skip over, but that's the real life of a union steward. You're trying to do something important, and you get interrupted. She finds Newton together with Elliot Drummond, who are the two top managers on the midnight shift, sitting together in the office, and she says, I just got off the phone with Martha Huntington. She needs to be at work. The last thing we should do is add to the ordeal that she's going through. Can't we show a little compassion? Philip's in jail. He can't cause any trouble here. He won't be in jail forever, said Newton. There's still a threat to the facility. If you're really concerned about that, we could detail her to another post office. Philip won't know where she's working. Drummond snickered. We don't have to detail her anywhere. She should take care of her own personal problems. Newton defended his letter. We believe in following the contract. Article 14 says we have to provide a safe working environment. We're doing just that. We don't know when her boyfriend will get out of jail. He could be out on bail any time. We can't endanger our employees. The decision stands. So that conversation took place in the middle of the night. In the morning, Angela goes to the local union hall to talk to the local president, and Paul Farley happens to be there also. I said there was this one local president that wasn't so good. Well, this is the one, and the best he can come up with is they should file a grievance about it. And Paul and Angela are talking to each other. We need something stronger than that, more immediate. So, shortly after midnight, Paul Farley was in Elliot Drummond's office. Farley was furious. If I came in here and I told you that I was going to shoot and kill James Newton, would you put him off work without pay like you did with Martha? Is that how you would protect the safety of the workforce? Are you threatening Mr. Newton's life? I think the police should be notified. No, I'm not threatening anyone. I'm just making a point. I think I heard you threaten to kill Mr. Newton, Drummond repeated. So that conversation wasn't going anywhere, and Paul goes back to the union office and talks to Angela. And her take is, we need two things right now. We need compassion for the victim, and we need allies. And so when the morning comes, she makes some phone calls. She calls a woman a friend of hers that she went to college with, who's now a newspaper reporter, and tells the reporter about what's going on. And the reporter starts calling the post office, and she calls the Coalition of Labor Union Women and the National Organization for Women, and they start working on plans for a picket of the post office. Hearing all this, management sees the light, and they put Martha right back to work. So when Martha returned, she stopped by the plant union office and gave Angela Roberts a great big hug. Ignoring the bruises on Martha's face, Angela said, "You look great." "You're a liar," Martha said, and then she hugged Angela again. Meanwhile, Drummond and Newton were talking in the manager's office. Newton wanted discipline issued to Farley for threatening to kill him. "No, sir," said Drummond. "We do that and all the circumstances will go public. That reporter lady will write her story after all. There's a better way to handle it. I've written a statement of exactly what Farley said. It might have been a real threat, but we decided not to take action to give him the benefit of the doubt. But if Farley makes an aggressive move towards you in the future, as we both know he will, we'll have the statement on file." There's a few things I want to say about this chapter that I just read. One is the letter that was written, sent to Martha Huntington, that came from a real grievance file. There really was a manager who was so ignorant as to send a letter to a woman who was a victim of domestic violence, putting her off of work. But in the real world, the local president, as soon as he heard about it, intervened vigorously, and it only took an hour or two to get the letter rescinded. I used my creative freedom to plot that chapter a little bit differently. But I think as a longtime steward talking to people in labor studies, there's a few ideas that I want to draw out of that chapter. And the first one is sometimes the role of the steward actually involves being a counselor, being an emotional support for somebody. It was really important that Angela stayed on the phone for half an hour with Martha and helped her through the ordeal that she's going through, in addition to letting her know that she had her back, that she was going to fight for her. And as a steward, I've certainly seen many times when someone comes into the union office and is just boiling mad, and we just let them let off steam, vent, calm down, and then we talk about what we're going to do about the situation. And I can't tell you how many times I've talked to employees who are suffering from depression. And as a steward, you do what you can. You don't substitute yourself for professional help. But that's a lot of what union stewards do, is helping people as a counselor or with emotional issues. The second point I want to make is you can have contract language that is crystal clear. Never underestimate management's ability to twist it around and pretend it means something totally different, like was done with Article 14 and putting Martha off of work. Or more specifically, it wasn't drawn out in the chapter here. Article 16 in our contract deals with the procedure for emergency placement, which is what they did with Martha. And the language in the letter about retaining you on duty may be injurious to yourself or to others, that's from the contract. That's intended for people who commit violence, and they're afraid that they'll come back and be violent again. It's not intended for a situation like Martha. But I don't know how many times as a steward I've seen crystal clear language, and I can't believe this idiot across the table from me is pretending it means something totally different. The third lesson, and probably the most important, sometimes you have to put some added pressure on the grievance procedure. As good as of a steward as you are, as much as you know the contract and have the ability to write up a grievance, this situation was resolved when Angela got a reporter and some women's organizations putting some pressure on. And there's some other chapters in the book where there's some pressure put on management, not from outside sources, but from rank and file workers standing as one and finding ways to put pressure on management in a creative manner. And that's a lot of the strength of a union, of any union, on the workroom floor level. Like I said, there's about 23 chapters that deal with this time frame, and most of them are on the workroom floor, and about a dozen later on with the arrest and the trial. And for someone out there in the general public, that might seem like an imbalance. It might seem they can't wait to get to the trial and find out who done it. But for labor studies folks, this is the right balance. And I think what I tried to do, or one way that I put it, in these chapters, I would say labor studies comes to life with characters you can identify with, and with a lot of situations that come up that provide food for thought and topics for discussion. All the while, dropping a few clues here and there as to who might turn out to be the real killer at the end of the book. And if anyone has any questions, I'll be happy to give my best shot at answering them.
Thank you.